The first religious subject that I attempted was a scene from the end of the Gospel of John, in which the risen Christ appears to Mary Magdalene, a subject known as Noli tangere, which means "do not touch me," the words spoken by Christ as the Magdalene was about to embrace him. For this painting, I adopted a strategy of invention recommended by Sir Joshua Reynolds, to copy and improve upon another composition designed by an old master. My chosen inspiration was a painting by the French colorist Charles de la Fosse, whose coloring I admired, but whose draftsmanship left room for improvement, following a more classical sensibility at least. Charles de la Fosse's style is loose and painterly, whereas mine is very tight, which means that I sacrifice a degree of dynamism and depth for the sake of a more linear classical beauty. I chose the very classical proportions of a 3x4 rectangle to contribute to a sense of stasis and serenity, a mood which I preferred for narrative reasons. At first, the Magdalene does not recognize Christ, but mistakes him for the gardener, which is why he is traditionally shown carrying a spade and without the stigmata, the wounds in his hands, feet, and side. Upon recognizing the risen Christ, the Magdalene's natural reaction is to throw her arms around him in joy. Yet Christ bids the Magdalene not to touch him, because he has yet to ascend to his Father. And this puzzling story has been understood as an allegory about the Eucharist, for where else does the bride of Christ touch Christ? Mary Magdalene is a type of the church, and in this case, specifically of the laity. At first, she is blind to who Christ is, just as one is blind to the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And when she finally recognizes him, the Magdalene does not understand the nature and significance of Christ's resurrection, which signifies something much more profound than resuscitation, like the raising of Lazarus. Jesus commands her to remove her hands in pointed contrast to the story of doubting Thomas, in which Christ invites Thomas to touch his wounds. The allegorical implication is that the laity whose hands are not consecrated are not to receive communion in the hand, because this action belies the nature of the sacrament and the dignity of God incarnate. Instead of reaching out toward Christ, as the Magdalene does in the painting by Charles de la Fosse, in my version she has already obeyed as she kneels, as if to receive the sacrament with the reverence that Christ deserves. Returning once again to the subject of technique, a painting is rarely finished in one layer alla prima, but generally has to be built up in stages. There are many different ways of doing an underpainting. One way is known as the Flemish technique, invented by Netherlandish painters such as Jan van Eyck, which consists of doing the underpainting in grisaille, i.e. shades of gray, and applying the color in thin glazes. In my Noli tangere, I use this technique for the figures, while underpainting the rest of the canvas in an umber wash over a mid-tone primer.